$35, the auctioneer said, and brought the gavel down before the number could climb any higher. Wendell Cutts laughed first. The men standing behind him laughed the way a crowd does. Not because anything was funny, but because the loudest man in the lot had laughed. Fella bought himself a boat anchor, Cutts said, loud enough to carry to the back row. Cyrus Bell did not look up. He signed the bid slip a second time, to make the number plain, and folded it into his shirt pocket without a word. It was the 9th of October, 1971. The temperature had not cleared 50 degrees since sunrise, and a thin fog still sat low over the ball field behind the building. 60-some people stood in the gravel lot behind Marrow Creek Consolidated School, coats buttoned to the throat, breath showing white and thin in the cold air. Somewhere behind the crowd, a dog barked twice and quit. The safe sat on a flatbed trailer at the center of it all, black paint gone to gray, a squat iron box the size of a footlocker. One corner caved in like something heavy had struck it decades back. 231 pounds, stenciled faint on the door in letters half rubbed away, along with a maker's mark from a foundry in Danville that had not made anything since the war. Nobody else in the lot had looked twice at the dial. Cyrus had. Rusted as it was, the wheel inside turned 2 clicks past where a dead lock should have stopped, a small resistance most men would never have felt through their fingertips at all. 40 years of listening to tumblers taught a man to notice that kind of thing even with his eyes on something else entirely. He signed a receipt, loaded the safe onto his truck bed with a chain hoist he had built himself in 1958, and drove home without saying another word to anyone in that lot. Marrow Creek had shut its doors in 1969, 2 years of empty hallways behind it, broken windows in the east wing, a roof gone soft where a maple branch had come through one winter storm. The county called the building condemned. They called everything left inside it condemned too, safe included, and sold off what they could not be bothered to open properly. Cyrus Bell had driven 40 minutes that morning for the one item nobody else in 3 counties still knew how to open without dynamite. Cyrus Bell stood 5'9" and had shrunk half an inch in the last 10 years, though he never once mentioned it to anyone. His hands were thick through the knuckle, the nails cut square, and always a little black at the edges from graphite and old machine oil. He wore the same gray canvas coat to every auction since 1963, the elbows gone shiny, a small burn scar on the left cuff from a torch he had held wrong as a young man. His eyes were pale blue and moved slowly over things. The way a man's eyes move when he has learned that most objects will tell you what they are if you are willing to wait long enough for the answer. He had been a locksmith for 43 years. His father taught him on a bank vault door in Pruitt County that nobody living could open anymore, showed him how to lay 2 fingers flat against the dial and feel for the wheel drop long, before he ever explained what a wheel drop was. Cyrus built his whole trade out of that kind of patience. Combination safes, timber locks, courthouse vaults with mechanisms nobody had manufactured parts for since Truman sat in office. Other men called these things junk. Cyrus called them conversations that had simply gone quiet. The trade had gone quiet on him too, in its own way. Banks used electronic keypads now. Insurance men wanted certified technicians with plastic badges, not an old man carrying a stethoscope and a coffee can full of picks. Cyrus kept working anyway, because a man who has spent a lifetime listening to what is locked does not stop listening just because fewer people bother to ask him. A lock is not a wall, he told his grandson once, the boy no older than 9 and already bored stiff in the shop doorway. It is a conversation. You just have to speak slow enough for it to answer you back. He had never married. He lived alone in a 2-room house behind his shop, kept a garden of tomatoes his wife would have wanted if he'd ever had one, and ate most suppers standing at the counter because sitting down alone at a table had never once suited him. His left knee had gone bad from 30 years kneeling on concrete floors, and on cold mornings like this one it told him so before he was fully out of bed. He kept a ledger of every safe he had ever opened, going back to 1934, a habit picked up from his father and never once broken. Most entries ran a single line. A few ran longer, the ones where something more than money had turned up inside. He did not consider himself sentimental. He considered himself a man who kept records, the same as any tradesman worth his salt. Wendell Cutts stood 6'2" in cowboy boots that added an inch he did not need. 52 years old, silver hair, combed back wet, a gray suit pressed sharp enough to still show the crease from the cleaner's hanger. He drove a Cadillac the color of a robin's egg and parked it crooked and close to the front, so that no one in that gravel lot could miss it. He chaired the Pruitt County School Board and ran a land company on the side, buying up condemned county property for pennies and selling it on to men from Little Rock who wanted to build shopping plazas where schoolhouses used to stand. He had already put an offer in on the Marrow Creek lot before the auction ever started. The safe, to a man like Cutts, was 40 pounds of dead scrap, standing in the way of a bulldozer schedule already written down on a calendar somewhere in his office. Old Cyrus Bell, Cutts said to the men gathered near the trailer, grinning wide enough to show a gold tooth in back. "Man's going to spend a week on a box that's been dead longer than his truck is." The crowd laughed again, the same way it had laughed before, following the loud man rather than any joke worth a name. Nobody in that lot had asked Cyrus a single question about why he wanted the thing at all. Now, if you have ever seen a man who knew exactly what he was doing get laughed out of a room by a man who did not, subscribe to this channel. Because the people who stay for stories like Cyrus Bell's are exactly who Abandoned America was built for. To be fair to Cutts, he was not wrong about most things he bought. He had a nose for land and had never once been caught cheating a man out of a deal in 20 years of trying. He was simply wrong about this one thing, and would not learn how wrong for another 11 days. Marrow Creek Consolidated School was built in 1931 with WPA lumber and county bond money, the pride of a town that had little else to point to during those years. It ran for 38 years under 4 headmasters, the longest serving of them a man named Emory Radle, who took the post in 1946, back from the war with a limp in his left leg and a habit of reading names off the honor roll like they were scripture read aloud in church. Radle installed that safe himself in the spring of 1951, bought secondhand from a hardware liquidation sale in Danville, bolted into the floor of his office in the corner where the janitor's supply closet now stood empty and dark. Nobody at the school ever once saw him use it. He kept his office locked most evenings, worked late by a desk lamp long after the last bus had pulled out of the yard, and told the school secretary only that it held paperwork best kept private from a board. Emory Radle died of a heart attack in that office on the 2nd of November, 1951, 7 months after the safe went in. He was 44 years old, found the next morning slumped forward over his own desk. Nobody on the board that year knew the combination, and nobody thought it worth the cost of hiring a locksmith to find out. They locked his office, then forgot the office within a year, then 20 years later condemned the whole building and forgot that too, the way whole towns sometimes forget the men who built them. Cyrus Bell had gone to that school as a boy. Radle once kept him after class for fighting, not to punish him, but to teach him how to reset a broken hinge on the classroom door, saying a boy with quick hands ought to use them for something better than his fists. Cyrus never forgot that afternoon. He was 17 the last time he saw Radle alive, and 51 years old now, standing over the same man's safe with his stethoscope pressed against cold iron in a shop that smelled of oil and sawdust. America, in 1951, was a country still catching its breath. The Korean War was into its second year. Ration cards from the last war, not yet a memory for most families in Pruitt County, and a schoolhouse like Marrow Creek was one of the few places in the county with indoor plumbing and a working furnace both. Radle had rebuilt half the school's curriculum with his own hands, wrote letters to state colleges on behalf of students nobody expected to leave the county at all, and paid for 2 sets of textbooks out of his own salary the year the board voted the funding down. He kept that safe locked because he did not trust a board capable of voting down textbooks with anything he cared about. He backed the truck to the shop door at 4 in the afternoon and walked the safe down a ramp of 2x10s, 6 inches at a time, one hand flat against the iron the whole way to feel for any shift in weight that might mean trouble. 11 miles from the schoolyard to his shop, driven at 28 miles an hour, because anything faster shook loose tumblers he did not trust to survive rough handling. By the time he pulled in, half the town already knew what he had bought that morning. His neighbor Odell Fay leaned over the fence and said the county would come and take it back the moment somebody remembered they still owned it. Odell was wrong about that. though nobody in Marrow Creek would learn how wrong for 11 more days. Cyrus set the safe on a furniture dolly in the center of his shop floor, under a single bare bulb hung from a rafter cord that swung slightly whenever the door opened. He pulled his stool close, laid his tools out across a folded shop rag. Feeler gauges, a stethoscope with a cracked rubber ear tip, a can of penetrating oil older than his truck outside. He turned the radio off. He always turned the radio off before he started, because a man could not hear a wheel drop over the sound of a ball game. The first attempt told him nothing at all. The dial fought him past 90 degrees and stopped dead. The wheels inside gummed solid with 40 years of rust and dust settled deep into the mechanism. He soaked the spindle with oil and left it 2 hours, went inside and ate a can of soup standing at the counter, watching the light fail outside his kitchen window, then came back out at 7 with his reading glasses on and his back already complaining about the stool beneath him. The second attempt gave him a will drop, faint, felt more through his fingertips than heard through the rubber tip pressed to the door. He marked the number in pencil on a scrap of cardboard and kept going, working slower now, breathing even the way his father had taught him 40 years before on that bank vault door nobody else could open. His hands ached badly in the cold shop air. He flexed them between turns and said nothing about the pain, because complaining had never once in his life opened a lock for him. Odell Fay, stopped by around 8, asked whether Cyrus figured on finding anything but old ledger paper in there. Cyrus said he didn't figure on anything. That figuring was a good way to miss what a lock was telling you. Odell laughed and went home to his supper. Wrong again, same as he'd been in the yard that afternoon. By 9 o'clock, he had 2 numbers marked down and a doubt sitting heavy behind his ribs that he did not care to name out loud. He sat back on the stool and looked at the safe a long while, wondering if 40 years of practice had finally run up against a mechanism too far gone to answer him back. He nearly called it a night right there, nearly covered the safe with a tarp, and went to bed with the 3rd number unfound. Instead, he stood, refilled his coffee cup at the pot on the workbench, and sat back down without another word to himself. The 3rd number came at 9:41, and this one he heard clean through the stethoscope. A small metallic click no louder than a fingernail tapped once against glass. He held very still after that sound, waiting to be sure it was real and not something his tired ears had invented for him. He thought briefly of putting the tools down and finishing in the morning with better light and a rested back. 43 years of habit told him a lock heard once should be finished the same night, before the mechanism had a chance to settle again and swallow what he'd just found. He stayed on the stool. At 9:47, he turned the handle. The sound it made was not a bang. It was closer to a sigh, iron sliding slow against iron after 20 years of silence inside, and with it came a breath of air that smelled of cold paper and old machine grease and something faintly like a schoolroom. Chalk dust gone stale in a space sealed shut since before most of the town's children were born. Cyrus did not reach inside right away. He sat where he was on the stool, hands resting flat on his knees, and looked at the open door for the better part of a full minute before he moved at all. The way a man looks at a door he has waited a long time to see opened. The bulb overhead threw a narrow yellow light across the safe's dark interior. Not enough to see clearly by, and he had to lean the desk lamp in close before the shapes inside resolved into anything he could name. His hands, when he finally reached them forward, were steadier than he expected them to be. He removed the contents one piece at a time, laying each one flat on the workbench before he ever touched the next. First, a metal cash box holding $41 in Warren County payroll bills, never collected by whoever had earned them. Then a stack of report cards bound in twine gone brittle, names of children who would be grandparents now themselves if they were living at all. Then a bundle of Series E savings bonds, $50 in face value, purchased in April of 1951 and matured now, 20 years on, to a hair over $100. Beneath the bonds, wrapped in a handkerchief gone stiff with age, sat a small tin of hard candy, the kind Radle had once handed out to students who'd earned it, and a photograph of the school's front steps taken the year it opened. Cyrus set both aside without comment. Last of all, at the very back of the safe, was an envelope, yellowed soft at every corner, addressed in careful fountain pen to Miss Eleanor Voss. Cyrus knew that name. Everyone in Marrow Creek over the age of 50 still knew that name. Eleanor Voss had taught 4th grade at the school until 1950, when a rumor about missing exam papers drove her clean out of town inside a single month. A rumor that was never once true and never once corrected by anyone who could have done it. Cyrus opened the envelope with a pocket knife along the flap, the way his father had taught him to open old paper, so as not to tear the seal beneath it. The letter ran 2 pages in Radle's small, careful hand. He had known, it said, that the rumor about the missing papers was false from the start, and it said nothing when it mattered most, afraid of what defending her publicly might cost him with the board that employed them both. The bonds were meant for her, a wedding gift he never got the chance to give, bought the same week he had planned to write, and asked her to come home to Marrow Creek for good. One line Cyrus read twice, slow the second time. A letter does not die when it goes undelivered. It waits. He sat with that letter a long while after reading it, the shop gone quiet except for the tick of the bulb cooling overhead. He did not cry. He wiped his hands on his trousers, an old habit left over from cleaner work decades before, and folded the letter back along its original creases, careful not to press a new line into paper that old and that tired. Then he stood, turned off the light over the workbench, and went inside to wash the coffee cup he had left sitting in the sink that morning. He drove the safe's contents to the county courthouse the next morning and set them on the clerk's desk without any ceremony at all, said only that they belonged to the estate, and to Eleanor Voss if she could still be found anywhere living. It took the clerk 4 days to trace her to a nursing home outside Fort Smith, 89 years old and sharp enough still to recognize Radle's handwriting the moment it was placed in front of her. Eleanor Voss held the letter with both hands the day it was brought to her, read it through twice without speaking, and asked only whether Emory Radle had ever remarried. Told that he had not, she nodded once and set the letter in her lap, and did not say much else about it to anyone who visited her after. Wendell Cutts heard about the letter over coffee at the diner, from a waitress who had heard it from the clerk's own daughter. His shopping plaza deal fell through inside the month. The buyers down in Little Rock spooked off by a county, suddenly unwilling to touch the property, while a dead headmaster's name sat in the local newspaper. Cutts sold his interest at a loss and moved his office out of the county entirely the following spring. Nobody in Marrow Creek missed the sight of that Cadillac parked crooked out front of the courthouse. The town restored one room of the old school as a small museum 2 years later. The safe sits open in the corner under glass now, door propped at the same angle Cyrus left it that October night, and children on field trips pressed their palms flat against the cold iron and asked what it was even for. Cyrus never took $1 for the bonds or the letter, and would have been embarrassed if anyone had ever offered him either one. He went back to his shop that same afternoon. He made the delivery and fixed a farmer's broken tractor lock before supper, same as any other ordinary day of his life. Wendell Cutts was not wrong about most of what he bought in this life. He was only wrong about the one time it truly mattered, standing in a cold gravel lot on a fog-thin October morning, laughing at a quiet man who already knew exactly what he was holding. What would you have done, standing in that same crowd, if the loud man laughed first and the quiet one said nothing at all in return? Some things, it turns out, are never really lost. They only wait for someone patient enough left to listen for them.